Indexing can be an alternative to sorting. So rather than sorting the entire vector every time on a particular field, if you have a vector of structures, it is frequently more efficient to instead create index vectors based on the different fields. Index vectors, which we've seen already, give the order in which the vector should be traversed. For example, vec sub square brackets 3, 1, 2 says go through this vector in the order, first the third element, then the first, and then the second. Here's a vector of structures called parts. So parts is a vector that has 4 elements in it. Each element is a structure that has 3 fields: code, the quantity, and the weight. Index vectors would tell you the order in which you should go through this parts vector based on a particular field. So for example, an index vector on the code field, CI we might call it, says if you wanted to go through this vector parts alphabetically based on the code, the A would be first, and then the X, and then the Y, and the Z. So the A is in element 3, and then the X is in element 1, the Y is in element 4, and the Z is in element 2. So this index vector says if you want to go through parts based on the code, start with the third element, then the first, then the fourth, then the second. On the quantity field, again, if you wanted ascending order, the first element, the 11, is the smallest, so that's our first element in our quantity index vector. And then the 25 is the next smallest, and that's in element 3, so we have 3. And then 31, which is in element 4, and then 33, which is in element 2. So if we want to go through the parts vector based on the quantity field, we'd go through the first element, then the third, then the fourth, and the second. And for the weight, the smallest is in the fourth element. So the smallest is in the fourth element, and the next smallest is in the second element, and then the third, and then the largest is in the first. So again, the index vector tells you the order in which you would go through the original vector of structures based on a particular field. Once you've created an index vector, how would you use it? So here we have a for loop that's going to loop through all of the elements in our parts vector from 1 to the length of parts, and the action is going to be to do something with part sub ci sub I. So notice here using the index vector to index into the original vector. So when I has a value 1, ci sub 1 is going to be 3. And so we're doing something with parts sub 3. So the first alphabetically code is in element 3. Then when I has a value 2, we're doing something with parts sub ci sub 2. Ci sub 2 is 1, where we have the next code alphabetically, parts sub 1. And then parts sub ci sub 3, which is 4, and then parts sub ci sub 4, which is 2. So again, we're saying go through the parts vector in this order. The third element, then the first element, then the fourth element, and then the second. So we're going through the parts vector in the order based on the code field. And if we used one of our other index vectors, we would be going through the vector in order based on that particular field. Now, we just created index vectors by inspection. That works if you only have 4 elements, but if you have a large vector, that doesn't work at all. So how do you actually create an index vector? Well, you basically use a sort function. So we could use our selection sort function, where the algorithm is to initialize the values in the index vector to the indices, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., up to the length of the vector. Use any sort algorithm. For example, we can use our selection sort algorithm. But when you compare the elements in the original vector, you use the index vector to index into it. So for example, using parts sub ci sub I as we did before. When the sort algorithm calls for exchanging values, instead of exchanging values in the original vector, you exchange the elements in the index vector. So again, creating index vectors is a fairly simple modification of our sort function. We start by initializing the values in the index vector to be the indices. We use our sort function. When we compare, we're using the index vector to do the comparison. And when we do the exchange, we're exchanging values in the index vector, not in the original vector.